Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Nebula. It has been half a decade since Avengers Endgame hit theaters in 2019. I'm gonna be honest, that's still pretty hard for me to believe. It does not feel like nearly that much time to me, but apparently I have no say in the passage of time, so here we are. And in many ways, it has been a rough 5 years for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There have been some real highs and some very notable lows, but I think it's hard to argue that the MCU has had that same sense of momentum and purpose since Endgame. Complaining about the state of the current MCU is old hat, and frankly, I'm pretty tired of doing it, but there's been something going on recently that made me want to jump back into the arena, at least for a bit, because it's potentially pretty huge, and I'm not sure how to feel about it. It's that Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man himself, keeps hinting that he would like to rejoin the MCU and come back as Tony Stark. This has some pretty major ramifications for Marvel, and I think they're worth talking about. Would the pros outweigh the cons, or would it come off as a desperate Hail Mary pass from a struggling studio? But first, I want to say the digital edition of my comic Binary C is available right now on Amazon and Kindle Unlimited. Check it out at that link below, and if you could leave a review on Amazon, that would be hugely appreciated.
War Machine! Good to see you!
Wrong, shellhead!
So, okay, what did Robert Downey Jr. say exactly? Well, in a conversation in Variety with Jodie Foster randomly, the Maverick star asked, "Would you think of putting the suit back on again for Tony Stark?" And Downey said, "It's just crazily in my DNA, probably the most like-me character I've ever played, even though he's way cooler than I am. I've become surprisingly open-minded to the idea." So there's the cynical reading of that. Yes, this would be a massive payday for Downey, and he's in a very good position to make Disney pull up to his house with an entire fleet of cash-filled dump trucks. I think that's obvious, but I also don't doubt that the role that saved his career and propelled it into unforeseen box office heights does mean quite a bit to him. And the fact that he finally got that Oscar for a beloved and massive hit movie no less probably doesn't hurt either. But regardless of what his reasoning is, he is putting that out there. But what does Kevin Feige have to say about this? Well, there was another Variety article in December of last year, headlined, "Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man will not return, says Kevin Feige. We would never magically undo his death." That's a pretty valid reason for thinking it'll never happen. The thing is though, I just don't buy it. I don't. Now, I'm not calling Feige a liar here. I doubt he's saying this stuff while prepping Iron Man 4 in the background or something. But at the end of the day, if the MCU keeps struggling in theaters, outside of Spider-Man, where obviously Sony takes home much of the money, and very likely Deadpool, where I suspect this new one will do well, but they probably can't count on the novelty of Hugh Jackman returning every time, something big will have to be done. It just makes me believe that Kevin Feige, and maybe more importantly his bosses at Disney, would take the concept seriously. So let's do the same. Do we actually want RDJ to return as Iron Man? Well, one thing to point out is that I'm sure if they did this, they'd dive even farther into the multiverse stuff. I think there's an almost 0% chance they bring back the MCU Tony Stark that we watched for a decade. That version of Tony, which they annoyingly insist on calling 616, but that's a topic for another day, is dead and buried. Going with a new multiverse version would be easy to justify story-wise, and would mean that they at least can save some face and insist that no, the ending of Endgame is still totally being respected. I doubt that many fans would actually fully buy into that, but they could do worse as far as excuses for a non-resurrection resurrection goes. They could get away with it, and they might feel that the huge wave of attention that comes with it would be worth it. I'm not saying it's likely, but if I were to just speculate, I'd probably guess that some of it will depend on how that next Captain America performs. If it does well and they show that that passing of the mantle can work with the MCU, and it comes in around similar numbers to the previous Cap films, that might be a sign that they don't need to push this button, that moving on from legacy characters while maintaining the brand works just as Marvel hoped. I think they did Sam Wilson Captain America dirty by debuting him in a pretty humdrum streaming show, which will really lessen the curiosity people have. But yeah, if it does really poorly and even a tried and true franchise name like Cap struggles at the box office, I could see them running to that break glass in case of emergency, bring back Iron Man button. But again, that's just speculation. But what would I like to happen? Well, I'm not going to pretend that the idea of bringing Robert Downey Jr. back doesn't hold some appeal to me. Of course it does. He was great in Iron Man in 2008, and I think he remained great in the role until the end. And honestly, this move would fall pretty in line with the MCU's comic book origins, where characters die and are brought back via alternate universes and stuff constantly. Superhero comic book characters don't stay dead almost ever. This could just be seen as a logical extension of that, but it's not ideal.
Iron Man, you're dead! Sorry, no one told me.
As exciting as it may be in the moment, I don't think bringing RDJ back is ultimately what's best for the MCU. Movies are not comic books, actors age, and they're just not serialized stories in that exact same way. And I think overall, it'd be far better for the MCU to forge a path forward and prove that it can introduce new things that excite people. Or I guess in this case, new old things. Obviously, Fantastic Four will be a test of that, but they're still sitting on maybe the biggest one of all, X-Men. Bringing back Hugh Jackman is one thing, but is the MCU at this point in time capable of introducing a version of the X-Team that connects with general audiences in ways that the Avengers did over 10 years ago? I'm pretty skeptical at this point, and really that only seems fair after the run of movies that they've been on lately. But on the small screens, they really pleased fans with X-Men 97, so it doesn't feel impossible. But even aside from the X-Men, Fantastic Four, or finally making MCU Blade work, which, by the way, they definitely need to do, I don't think bringing back Iron Man will ultimately accomplish what Marvel would want from it, to push the MCU back into the center of film and pop culture like it was back in 2019. I'm not saying it's going away entirely or that there won't be any more big hits, but I think it's fairly safe to say that in terms of cultural relevancy, Avengers Endgame represented the end of something. That's been assisted by the MCU's incredibly spotty track record since then, but it likely would have been true either way. Because Endgame, I think, really accomplished what it set out to do, function as an emotionally satisfying conclusion to a decade of movies. You can build something new out from there, maybe, but I don't think you can keep retreading that ground with those same characters and have it mean as much. Like Sean Connery returning to James Bond for Diamonds Are Forever and then once more for Never Say Never Again, there's just bound to be diminishing returns there. The moment in culture passed, and a much older Connery Bond in the 80s just isn't the same as the performance that kicked off the 60s spy craze with mega hits like Goldfinger. At a certain point, even the same actor can feel like a pale imitation. And though I think Downey would be more engaged with the work than the pretty checked out Connery was at that point, it would be pretty sad to see. And of course, there's something to be said for just leaving well enough alone, especially if it risks undercutting a movie that meant a lot to people. So what do you think? Do you want to see Iron Man return? Would an alternate universe version be okay with you? Do you think this is a terrible idea? I want to read it all down below. So in case you somehow didn't know, Nebula is a boutique streaming service that features my entire back catalog, including some exclusive videos. And they recently had their biggest update ever. They've got a completely new homepage, and that's far from all. Nebula created their new UI to make it easier to find content from both new creators and existing favorites, really highlighting the specific categories with the goal of making Nebula more user and creator friendly. And I think they've really achieved that. Maybe you've heard me talk about all the creators they have on there, from Lindsay Ellis, who uploads exclusive videos, Windover Productions, Be Kind Rewind, Nano V Movies, and so many more. But they're also placing an exciting emphasis on originals now, including original fiction, which I'm really excited about, like Patrick H. Willems, who has a new short film there. there. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Nebula is enabling creators to take their work to the next level. And there's never been a better time to jump on that Nebula train. So go to nebula.tv/captainmidnight and get Nebula for 40% off an annual plan. Basically, just $250 a month. That's nebula.tv/captainmidnight.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.